Assalamu alaikum. You're watching the program I Beg to Differ. This is a program which focuses on interactive debate on socio-political, economic, cultural and religious issues affecting South Africans both locally and certainly at a global level. South Africa's fuel prices have in recent months been battered extensively so by both global and local events to proportion never before seen. The antics of the erstwhile President Jacob Zuma at National Treasury in 2016 created a significant barrier and bulwark to the economic decline in terms of fuel prices. According to Bloomberg, South Africa remains one of the few countries in the world which is indeed one of the most expensive in terms of keeping petrol tanks full. And this has had consequentially deploring effects on the lives of the average South African. Well, joining us in the studio to discuss this shocking state of affairs, we're joined by Mr. Viswan Reddy, who is the founder and CEO of PAPI, which is the People Against Petroleum Price Increases. Welcome, and it's good to have you.
Thank you very much, and hello to your viewers.
Now, Viswan, just to start off, at this particular point in time, we've probably seen the highest price ever for purchase of fuel in respect of petrol, in respect of diesel, than has ever been in the whole history of South Africa. Yeah. What's a fundamental prime factor motivating this? Because a lot of the issues we see, particularly in the broader perspective in the mainstream media, the indication seems to be that a lot of this is also caused as a result of the antics during the previous dispensation by Jacob Zuma within the National Treasury, coupled with other factors that have led to the deplorable situation that we as South Africans face.
I don't think this has anything to do with Jacob Zuma or any of those antics. It's other antics at play, and I'm hoping to uncover that during our discussion. Yes, it's true. We are currently paying the highest we've ever paid for fuel in this country, ever in the history of fuel in the country. And we know that recently, in the past week, fuel went up by over 1 rand, a whopping 1 rand, over 1 rand a litre. And we anticipate that by the end of the year, fuel prices will reach close to 20 rands a litre. And the reason that the government gives us is that crude oil prices are increasing. And remember, we are buying crude oil, which we import, and the crude oil is bought in dollars. And as the rand weakens against the dollar, you are requiring more rands to buy the crude oil. So because of the rand now sitting at around 15 rands to the dollar, and your crude oil is almost 80 rands, $80 a barrel, we now faced with this sort of...
But I just want to add one thing. In 2016, there was a global decline in the price of, actually the oil price of that particular year. And the argument that is presented, which you say is not directly linked up to Zuma, the fact that, you had this kind of skullduggery at governmental level, particularly under his administration, we as South Africans never benefited from that global oil decline. In fact, we saw the opposite effect, where the price, in fact, went skyrocketing 2016, 2017, and now this crescendo in 2018, which we never experienced. Cool. So, I mean, to suggest that there was no role played by his administration, certainly with other factors, I mean, that is a prime factor that we need to consider as well.
All right. 10 years ago, we had a situation where the crude oil prices was half what it is today. But our fuel prices were not brought down to that, in line with that decrease. And obviously there was poor, bad management.
Yes.
But there's another factor that we need to consider here, and that is the taxes, government taxes and government levies. So it's a lot of hogwash when the government tells us that the only reason fuel prices are increasing, it's because of crude oil and your rand dollar.
Which is a myth.
Absolute myth.
It's an absolute myth.
Absolute myth, because 38% of what you pay for fuels today it goes towards government taxes and levies. The levies goes to your road accident fund. 1 rand 63 of every litre of petrol you buy goes to the road accident fund. And let's look at the road accident fund. severely mismanaged.
Absolutely.
About a month ago, the entire board of the Road Accident Fund was dissolved. They were removed. And you know about claims. People can't even get their money and so on and so forth.
The exorbitant claims. They've literally been milked for the past, past 2 decades.
Attorneys are being investigated for milking the Road Accident Fund for millions of rands. Now, you're looking at about 40 billion rands going to the Road Accident Fund. The other portion goes into state treasury. And it was a serious misnomer when government said that your taxes on fuel was going to the upgrade of your roads and road infrastructure. That's not happening. That's not happening because this money goes straight into treasury. And we know what's happening in treasury. So 38% of what you pay in your fuel prices goes to government taxes and levies. And look at this. In the past 10 years, that component of your fuel prices increased by 400%.
That's shocking, absolutely.
It's absolutely shocking. So the easiest way government can get money out of the people is through fuel, because fuel is something people can't do without.
So the solution to that would be a reduction in fuel levy at the very least.
We are saying you remove it.
Taxes.
Take it out completely.
Take it out. This is unnecessary.
There's no need to tax fuel. Let me explain to you that one of the things that fuel increases does, it doesn't only affect motorists. It's a serious mistake we make when we say that fuel increases affects motorists only. No, it affects every South African, especially the poorest of the poor. In this country, Stats SA 2 years ago released figures that says over 55% of our population live under the poverty line. That means that over 55% of our South African population are people who live a hand-to-mouth existence. They either have no income, living in abject poverty, or they rely on grants, state grants. Now, when you increase the price of fuel, it has a direct impact on your food prices,
your commodities,
costs,
your basic amenities in life.
Goes up. And when people argued against this, last month, the price of bread went up by 50 cents. Now, let me tell you what government says. Government says, hang on, we're giving you a VAT exempt. We're exempting certain food items from VAT. Now, you must be an idiot not to see this. Take out VAT, but that bread or that maize still has to be transported. And somebody has to pay the added cost of transporting which is built into the price.
It's built into the price itself.
So that's why bread prices went up, and your bread company said the basic price of bread is going up by 50 cents because of the fuel increases. Now,
so it has the actual opposite effect.
Correct. Now, what countries do, this is the international norm. You keep what is called fuel reserves. We had in this country 10.5 million barrels of reserves. And these reserves are considered strategic reserves. They're assets, state assets, because the value of that depends on your crude oil value. 2 years ago, crude oil was selling at $66 a barrel. Do you know what the Minister of Energy did? Shocking. In a shocking move, she sold these reserves without getting authority from Treasury. You see, Treasury regulations state that when you're selling off any state asset of a considerable value, which is stipulated in the regulations, you need to get the permission of Treasury.
No permission was got at that particular stage.
Yes, absolutely. And these reserves were sold.
Well, we're planning to get the Minister of Energy at this particular... Unfortunately, he turned down this interview at the last minute, claiming to have been burnt out, and so he's postponed it. We hope to have you again when we have him online with us via Skype. But it seems to be that there's a manipulation at Treasury level, at governmental level, in terms of what's transpiring.
I just want to deal with this issue of the reserves quickly. Currently, our country is vulnerable because this government doesn't know they don't know the A's and B's.
Sure.
Seriously, they need to go back to school, because what other countries do is when your crude oil prices go to the skyrocket, they don't pass those increases on to their people. They cushion the increases by dipping into the reserves. So we have never done that.
Why haven't we done that?
We have never done that. It was done prior in the old apartheid days. The apartheid government actually did that.
It's quite ironical, really.
Very ironical. But our government saw it fit to pass these increases directly onto people, because I don't think this government understands that fuel prices, the impact it has on the ordinary folk in this country.
It's a lack of disconnect.
They
Absolutely.
think that it affects only motorists. They don't realize it affects every South African. And that is the problem.
So would you agree then with the whole notion as, well, I mean, again, cynicism there, but how the leader of the opposition stated that the actual financial strain faced by the country in terms of the increase of the fuel prices can be as a direct result, in fact, of corruption per se, coupled with other factors as well?
I'll tell you what we're doing in this country, right? We have a bucket, and in that bucket, we've got a whole lot of holes in the bucket, holes in this bucket. Instead of fixing the holes, we keep pouring water inside. And that's what the government is doing. They're continuously finding, that's why we're getting more loans. We are getting billions of rands of loans from China and other countries.
Increasing the indebtedness of the country.
Correct.
With interest.
Correct. Not fixing the problems.
They're not bailing us out.
Yes.
And so at the end of the day, we have to pay money to the South African Airways. We pay money to Eskom. Eskom's another issue.
Correct.
Paying money to the Road Accident Fund.
And
monies are being siphoned out. And absolutely. Now, I just want to bring you in. You represent, or you're the founder of People Against Petroleum Price Increases. Just give us a brief background of your organization, your NGO. What does it do? What's the kind? Do you have a kind of a six-laid step in terms of saying these are the factors or the trajectory where we're going to head in terms of alleviating this particular burden?
Yes. When fuel prices went up by 85 cents, if you remember, and at that time people said that this was the highest fuel price increase we've ever had, and then we also believed that the government was misleading the people of this country and not giving them the facts. We then began a campaign to empower people to understand how fuel prices are determined and how fuel prices are structured. And as a result of the campaign that we've started, South Africans are now talking, and they now know for the first time in our history that we're paying this much in taxes, that our fuel reserves have been stolen. A minister has been responsible for stealing these reserves. It was sold at $26 a barrel at a time when it was $66 a barrel. 5.5 billion rand sale. No one has done anything about it.
I'm just going to have to stop you on that point. When we come back, we'll deal with this particular issue. We have to go for a quick ad break, and we'll be back shortly. Welcome back to I Beg to Differ, and with me in the studios is Visvan Reddy from PAPI, and we're discussing the heated issue affecting all South Africans dealing with the increase in fuel prices. Visvan, just before we left for the break, we discussed about your particular NGO, PAPI, and what's engaging, and I just stopped on the point in terms of the trajectory that you're dealing with. Obviously, you mentioned and alluded to the aspect of fuel reserves and the theft that occurred, but your organization, the trajectory that it plans to actually embark upon in terms of dealing with the present status quo that we find ourselves faced with.
Yes. One of the issues that many South Africans don't know about is this issue of Sasol.
Yeah.
Sasol produces 1/3 of our country's fuel needs and also supplies neighboring countries.
And this was formed in the apartheid era. It was formed back then.
And South African taxpayers, not taxpayers, through a special fuel levy, contributed to the development of Sasol. And Sasol was meant to be a state company, a state-owned company, to mitigate against the international variances in things like crude oil prices and so on.
And the source of the fuel,
it comes from coal.
It comes directly from coal. Slightly, now, it's more cheaper in many ways. Way cheaper. More.
The cost to manufacture Sasol fuel is just under 3 rands a litre. Now, look at what's going on here. Every time you increase the fuel prices, Sasol fuel prices, because the government regulates the price of fuel in this country. So, Sasol fuel you pay the same for Sasol, BP, and Shell, and every other fuel company, yet those companies rely on crude oil. But Sasol fuel comes from coal. So your crude oil and your rand dollar value has nothing to do with Sasol.
Absolutely nothing.
That's the reason why 10 years ago, Sasol was making a profit of 100 million rands a day. Today, it is one of the most highly profitable companies in this country. And much of the profits are leaving this country because the owners of Sasol are not South Africans. They're overseas people. And so what we said was, government needs to deregulate the price of fuel in this country so that, because South Africa is a fuel producing country. Let's understand that.
We're going to be self-dependent.
Yes, we are a fuel
relying on foreign-based companies like British Petroleum, Caltex,
there's no
Total,
need for that.
French, United Kingdom.
Yes,
unnecessary.
No need for that. We have a company in this country that is producing so much of fuel that we are sending the fuel over to Botswana, to Mozambique, Swaziland, and so forth, and they're paying less than 10 rands a litre.
There was a meme on social media recently, and obviously you have to look at the authenticity of this, where the price of fuel and petrol and diesel in Lesotho is way less than what we pay here in South Africa.
It's less than 10 rands.
Less than 10 rands.
And yet the same fuel is coming from
here. The same fuel comes from South Africa.
It's from Sasol.
How do you explain the cynicism of that? Because, I mean, this is something which, cutting aside all the kind of mumbo-jumbo that you get from at governmental level. This is what angers people, that when neighboring countries like Botswana, like Lesotho, like Swaziland, where I would assume the GDP is much lower, are paying far lesser for fuel. How does a South African basically reconcile this position within his own mind and say, look, explain the kind of disconnect that happens here, explain the economic disconnect in terms of how someone that's getting fuel from our country, we are the source providers, they're paying far lesser.
The problem is that government is using propaganda to keep these important facts away from us.
But to what end? That's my point.
To protect themselves, because they are making a huge mistake, a huge blunder. It's because of government's inability to think out of the box and to look at creative solutions at reducing fuel prices in this country. They have no commitment to do it. We will be continuously burdened with these increases if we use the government's current formula.
And I mean, the audacity by the Minister Jeff Radebe, just I think a few days ago, to say get economically sustainable vehicles consuming lesser fuel. The average price of that vehicle is 200,000 rands, beyond the capacity of the average South African to in fact afford that or to drive less. These kind of superficial solutions
the French
show a sense of desperation.
Yes.
And I mean, I do see that within the ANC caucus there has been some protestation, but at the end of the day, you have a situation where this government is relying on a sense of desperate argumentation to sustain and bolster its position in terms of justifying the increase in fuel price.
Let's use the government's current formula, where they look at crude oil prices. We get the bulk of our crude oil from Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
The second largest volume of crude oil we get from Nigeria, then Angola, and the fourth is Iran. Now, we as a government, we should be doing what India did. And let me give you the illustration of India. India, they went on fuel protests 4 or 5 years ago, before the last election. It was called the Bharat Bandh. The Bharat Bandh, where people said, we are all staying away. We'll shut down, a complete shutdown.
The same thing happened in Germany, am I correct?
Yes, in Germany.
In Germany
and
a couple of months ago.
I will discuss Haiti just now. But in India, do you know what happened? And now we're talking about solutions. We're going to solutions. We realize the problem is with government. The solution is also with government. And this government is not prepared to listen. We tried, we went to them. I mean,
Has Pappy gone to the Department
of Energy? We went right up to the presidency.
What happened? What was the response?
We've given them,
certainly you must have presented a particular perspective.
They said it was excellent ideas. It was wonderful ideas, never thought of before in the country. And they put us on to other departments, and that's where we stuck. But I'll tell you why just now, before the show ends, why the government is reluctant to move.
What's the reason?
I'll tell you about that just now. But let's first deal with India. In India, an entire government, the Congress party, was running the government for decades. The Congress party was outvoted by the people because of the way they handled the fuel prices. Do you know that? They protested and they said, we've had enough, we'll get rid of you. They got rid of that government. And now the BJP is in. Do you know who's leading the fuel protest now in India? The Congress party.
The Congress party.
And they got an election coming up now. So critical to election success in India is the fuel. Number one priority is what a party will do, or what a party is doing currently to deal with the fuel issue, because fuel prices affects everybody. This is not an issue that affects just one little community somewhere. It affects all South Africans. Let's be clear about that. This month alone, This increase of 1 rand per litre, let me tell you what it means. It means an average household needs to find an extra 500 to 700 rands a month.
It's
salary,
impossible.
your wages
the average
is
salary
not going up.
will not even cover that.
It's not going up
at all.
to accommodate that. And that's why the cost of living in this country is going to go up, and your poverty levels are going to increase simply because the government is not thinking out of the box.
And I just want to also focus on this particular point, because this is a myth put forth by the Department of Energy at governmental level, that the rise in oil prices is as a result of the shortage of fuel, which is a myth. In fact, in many instances, you have a deliberate manipulation in the oil and energy markets. You have, for example, the speculative trade in index, in funds, in futures and options in the commodity markets. All this has got nothing to do with there being no oil or no fuel or no source for the particular fuel. It's actually manipulation at a global level, and certainly brought forth on a more local level.
If you want to keep your sanity, please don't listen to the government.
Yeah.
Really.
I would agree with that.
Because what the government is doing is they want you to focus on things which is really not the issue. Why aren't they talking about Sasol? Why aren't they talking about the taxes and the levies? Now, we are saying as PAPI, remove taxes and levies.
So not a reduction, a total removal
Complete
of
removal.
fuel.
And then the question the economists will say, and the other, ultra-right wingers, they will say, where are you going to get the money from? Because the government gets around 240 billion rands from fuel taxes and levies. Where are you going to get that money from? So let's not talk about the corruption, and let's leave all that there. The solution lies with an ANC proposal. That's what I cannot understand. But you'll see that how this thing will unfold just now. I will give you facts to substantiate this. In 1992, former President Nelson Mandela announced what the ANC would do when they come into power. He said they have a resolution to introduce a wealth tax on monopoly industries. Monopoly industries are things like your banks, where the owners don't live in this country, they're foreigners. You have your insurance companies like Sanlam and Old Mutual, your mining companies,
particularly
like London and all that there. So you know the list. They occupy 90% of the JSE. In 1992, they occupied it. In 2018, they still occupy it.
The reason is a lot of these companies co-opted the very politicians that were they were co-opted.
You are brilliant.
I mean, the president himself. He was part of the trade union movement in the 80s, fighting, for example, against Anglo-American that bankroll apartheid. Post-1994, what happens? He gets co-opted, he becomes the front face, the rented face for Anglo-American.
Correct.
And so you can't have then in that circumstance, because it effectively buys into the very whole nexus that has been established.
Now we're talking serious stuff here. Serious stuff. If you look at what happened to these ANC activists and all these people that came from underground, overground, they came from exiles and everywhere else with no money.
Instant millionaires overnight.
They became instant millionaires with mansions in Houghton, in Sandton and everywhere. Where did that come from? It came from your Oppenheimers, it came from your all these big,
well, most of the conglomerates.
Conglomerates, right? Now, what they did was when Mandela announced this, in 1994, they were supposed to impose a wealth tax on these companies so that we don't have to pay for the tax from our fuels. And today, the government must be able to say, we want to go back and impose this wealth tax on those companies and not impose the tax on the fuel. But they wouldn't do that because they are compromised. You have ministers today, ministers who are sitting on boards as directors of these companies. And so where are they? There's a conflict of interest.
It's a conflict of interest, totally.
Whose interest do you serve? They have been protecting the interests of these monopoly industries at the expense of South Africans. They sold out the cause. They sold out the ANC principles. All sold out. Why? Just for the money. So they must not come and talk to us.
That's the whole thing. You could subsidize petrol and all these other expenses that we face. But the reality then is that you're painting an extremely bleak picture that the government doesn't care for the people.
Yes,
the
correct.
ANC government does not care for the people of South Africa.
And that's the reason why I had to break away. Okay. I'm an ANC member. Currently, I'm an ANC member. And I'm saying to the ANC, if you're not happy with what I'm doing, then suspend me, or fire me, or do something like that.
We have to stop for a quick ad break. We'll be back on that point, and we'll be back shortly. welcome back to I Beg to Differ. This is Yusuf Ismail, and I'm engaged in a robust discussion with Viswan Reddy, who is the founder and CEO of PAPI. Just to start, before we left off, one of the other solutions that government pointed out or alleged was the fact that they were going to spend at least about R500 million to finance the shortfall in fuel prices. That's what was alluded to by the Energy Minister, Jeff Radebe. But again, that 500 million rands doesn't come from the air. That's effectively taxpayers' money. So it again is a penalty on the consumers, on the average South African public.
He needs to be charged for that. I'll tell you why. Under normal circumstances,
I hope you don't have a case of defamation against you.
Sure. Welcome. Please bring it on. Bring it on. You'll defend me. The thing is, Yusuf, is that 500 million rands worth of oil, we could have dipped into our reserves. There was no need for us to go and find it somewhere hidden in some department. And that's what they did. And isn't it ironical, the same government that said, it's out of our hands, we can do nothing about these fuel increases, they would suddenly come last month and say, we are not going to pass on the 25-cent increase, we're now going to pass on 5 cents, we'll find 500 million. If the government continues with this sort of narrative and this trajectory, I am afraid that I'm worried. I'm very worried.
Well, the minister, from what I understand, has signed the permission for the surplus funds to be used
last
for
month.
that particular purpose, for the last month. Yes.
Only for last month. But obviously that has been carried over to this month. And we know that crude oil prices are going up. It's expected to go up to $100 a barrel. The rand is getting weaker thanks to our wonderful...
So you're looking at 20 rands, 25 rands per litre at the end of the year.
The government will not be able to cushion that at all. We've got no fuel reserves to do it. They're not going to dip into any other funds. The people are going to have to pay for this.
What's the limit? I mean, surely there needs to be a limit to this. I mean, it's going to be... Because it seems to be perpetual. You have a sudden, slight decrease in the price by maybe 20 cents, then a sudden jump. So is there going to be a limit? Because it seems to be just a single crescendo with no end in sight.
Well, in India, they pegged the prices. They pegged the fuel prices. And the government came into power saying that the fuel prices will never go past this, this limit. And that's one of the reasons why India has decided to move away from OPEC and start buying fuel from Iran. And Donald Trump is, of course, upset with India because India is buying fuel from Iran. But I want to tell you this, if we have a government that knows how to negotiate, we would go to Iran right now because Iran is looking for customers. The issue with Trump and Iran and nuclear and all of that has got nothing to do with South Africa.
Irrelevant.
It reminds me of our arms deal. Why did we spend so many billions of rands on arms? Who are we fighting as a country? I mean, we were not fighting anybody, but we went and spent 50 billion rand on arms, and today, you know, all the corruption and everything are linked up with that. So it's, India said that if we don't keep our fuel prices at the agreed level, we'll come out of government. People will outvote us. So we've got no other alternative but to go to Iran, and Iran is offering us a better deal.
Are you suggesting that should be the position here in South Africa?
Now, we met with officials from Iran as PAPI. And one of the ideas that they said that they presented to the government, to our president, was to say that they don't want money for crude oil. What they want in return is citrus, sugar, and one other commodity. It's an agricultural product. They want 3 of those things. Now, we are spending 1 trillion rands for crude oil, which we are importing.
It's unnecessary.
1 trillion. Wait. 1 trillion. Let's assume we increase our imports from Iran to say 300 billion, right? And that money doesn't leave the country. It stays here in an account which pays the farmers to produce the goods that they require. We will create a stimulus of the economy. The money is not going to be coming from loans from elsewhere. It's money that would have ordinarily left the country, that will stay in the country and will start
generating income.
Yes, start developing the farms here. All the farms, thousands of farms which are lying barren, We now have a customer that will buy the goods, take the goods, so form of bartering. We'll create jobs, we'll stimulate this economy, that money will stay in the country, our recession, there will be an upturn in the recession. This requires some intelligence, some creative thinking. You know, and unfortunately the government lacks that.
These recommendations, were they made at governmental level?
They were made to the president. That's what we were told.
When was this?
This was about a month or two ago, when a high-level delegation from Iran visited the country.
What was the response? I mean, from your understanding, was there any kind of buying to this particular
strategic goal? If there was any buy-in, you think we would have not heard about it? We never heard about it. This is something we heard in a discussion with an official from the
There was no
Iranian
media
embassy.
coverage on this?
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing.
And I'm saying that even if it is not discussed, that is an option they need to consider. That's a creative way of looking at this thing, where we start saying we can start to create economic stimulus, especially with our agriculture, and start developing our farms and so on, using you know, our exchange with Iran.
Has a task team at this particular point in time been appointed by government to deal with this issue?
Yes.
And what's its role? Because you know, there was a process. We spoke about the kind of subsidy last month, the 500 million rands, but apparently there was going to be a report back. The impact on travel costs, rising fuel costs, increasing to the consumer and producer price inflation. All of this was going to be analyzed, and there's going to be a report back by this task team. We've never heard anything in the media in respect of what it's done.
The only thing we've heard was that a task team will be set up, and that's all we've heard.
Well, at the end of September, there was going to be a report back to Cyril Ramaphosa. There's been absolutely nothing that we've heard. We're now sitting going to mid-October.
They've got a ministerial committee that's formed a task team to look at factors that will mitigate against poverty levels. And they came up with this idea about increasing the basket of VAT-exempt foods, which to me doesn't make sense at all, because your fuel costs is going to impact on the basic costs of these foods. So whether you have VAT or you don't have VAT, it's still going to, you know, it's still going to affect the price of food. Unless the government is going to subsidize those companies that produce these foods and say, we're going to be contributing towards the manufacture of that goods. I don't think they're going to be doing that.
Absolutely not.
So the government needs to focus on two things. One, on Sasol. It needs to bring Sasol back into the state ownership. Like you talk about expropriation of the land.
At what point was a transition from... So Sasol presently, just brief us in, is no longer state-owned.
No.
It's not state-owned, and most of the owners are foreign-based.
Yes.
But this was a company that was formed during the apartheid era.
Yes. By the government.
By the government itself of the day. And at some point, I would assume after transition, it acquired the status of being privately owned, or private ownership occurred. Are you saying that needs to be... That needs to go back to the state? There needs to be a deregulation. What needs to subsequently happen is lower fuel price by Sasol, with the resultant factor that a reliance by South African consumers will thereby have a ripple effect in causing your standard BP, British Petroleum, Caltex engine to drop the fuel prices. Right. So that would have a consequential ripple effect across the board. And that would be an ideal solution because of the fact that now this company would obviously, obviously state-owned fuel provider will basically be providing significant competition to all the other companies that are foreign-owned.
If we do that, the price of Sasol
that would be a meaningful solution.
Yes, the Sasol fuel price, including taxes and levies, will be 8 rands a litre.
Extremely cheap.
And we'll be paying 8 rands for Sasol. And don't you think, what will happen to the other BP and Shell and all of them? They'll close up.
They'll have to close up.
I would rather the government invest in more refineries in this country.
So this idea of these foreign multinational oil companies investing is actually, in many instances, it's impoverishing the country by and large.
Yes, but look at ANC activists, all serving on these companies.
And that's a
BP,
problem that we have.
On Shell, and
They're
all of them.
They're serving on these companies, so why would they want them to basically? It's a conflict of interest. It's a conflict of interest entirely.
That's why we are saying, one, expropriate Sasol. Sasol must come back into the ownership of the state.
How do we do that? How do we do that?
Just like how we're doing the land. You know, we're taking over the land, we must go take over Sasol in the same way. And the government, if they got some intelligence, they will know how to do it. It's simple. It's very simple. That Sasol belongs to this country. It uses our resources.
It's our fuel.
Our fuel. ANC documents, ANC Freedom Charter, says that the minerals from the land belongs to all the people. It must be shared by the people. Our mineral coal, which is making fuel, is going, the profits from that is going to foreigners. It's not going to South Africans.
Which is absolutely shocking in terms of
It's
that.
absolute rubbish.
So this notion then about a reduction that the DA mentioned, you're not calling for reduction in the fuel levy. You're
DA
calling
is
for
talking
a total.
about a 1
You're
rand
talking about a
reduction.
total.
What is
and
1
rand is meaningless.
It's what you pay 17
that makes
rand
about
now.
3 rand 37 a litre of the fuel price, which is still extremely high. The DA is campaigning for a 1 rand reduction in the fuel levy.
No, they've changed their position now. They have changed their position to support us as PAPI. I've met Musi Maimani. I explained to him where we're coming from, and he seems to be understanding, and he says, yes, now they're calling for a complete scrapping of the levies, but they never go into this thing with the depth that we have gone into it, to provide the solutions where you can find that additional monies from. What we're saying now is let's go to solutions. What can the ordinary South African, the listener who's listening into this program, what can they do?
I just want to find out, why is it that our SADC countries in the SADC region are paying far lesser than we as South Africans? Why?
Because of our taxes. We pay the highest.
Why are their taxes low? Why are their taxes low?
Because the government has determined that they should be paying less tax. They recover that money.
So then what prevents our government from doing that? What prevents our government from doing that?
Good question. The government is not doing it. We need to make the government do it.
And so pressure groups like yourself.
Absolutely.
Do you have sister organizations that you presently work with?
We are networking. We're trying to network with organizations. We've got political parties that have come on board. There are organizations, but remember, we don't get funded by anybody. We don't get funded by anybody. So ours is pure volunteer work, and that's that also makes it difficult for us to really, campaign the way we would like to campaign. We can't because we don't have.
Well, we're going to have to go and pay our bills now. We'll be back shortly for the final segment, but this is a robust discussion. We'll be back shortly. Welcome back to our Beg to Differ. This is Yusuf Ismail, and I'm engaged in a robust debate with Vissen. Well, it's not much of a debate with Mr. Reddy. We basically seem to be in agreement. I just want to read a quotation from the leader of the opposition, in the sense that, for me, it seems to me that symptomatic that dysfunctionality of government, corruption, you end up paying through your back teeth. And this is a quotation that he made. He says that Jacob Zuma never stole on his own. He would have had to be much cleverer than he is. And I know Mr. Zuma, let me tell you this, he didn't steal on his own. He was head of a syndicate organization that never stopped stealing. They are stealing everywhere. They will continue to steal. And you extend this to, for example, not just theft that you see on a weekly basis in our national newspapers and other alternative media, but also in terms, for example, things like cabinet. Bloated cabinet, one of the largest, for example, in the world, the largest indeed in Africa. And the fact that the money that is spent on cabinet, in many respects, those funds could be used to subsidize a few levies. We do have other forms of corruption on a lower level. I mean, we've seen the report in the Sunday Times last week of the luxurious apartment where ministers are basically subsidized. But I'm saying all of this together, I mean, that may be small in the bigger scheme of things, but collectively, this impacts us, and we end up paying through our back teeth. We end up paying and looking for funds where sometimes people cannot find.
You know, the thing is, if you look directly at the Road Accident Fund, which is funded directly from fuel levies, 1 rand 63 of every litre goes to the Road Accident Fund. Totally mismanaged. The board has been dissolved. They are bankrupt. They're hiring chairs at 500,000 rands a month because they can't buy chairs because the sheriff of the court will come and take away the chairs because they're owing people money. So you can see you've got these holes in the bucket.
Well, you cut that off. What then sustains the Road Accident Fund? Bankrupt as they are now.
Yes.
What will sustain them? The entire fund will collapse. It will be non-existent.
It will be non-existent. We just believe that there should be an alternative way of raising the funds.
Because I mean, attorneys have been responsible as well for what's happening in the fund.
Correct, 100%. You know, some sort of a state insurance or something like that, that people will contribute towards. That'll go to that. But we have not given it thought for me to even make a comment.
Bloated cabinet. Get back to the issue of the cabinet.
I'll come to the cabinet, and let's understand this. Why is the cabinet bloated? Right. We have the NEC of the ANC has been extended to 80 members. Yeah. So now the government had to be increased to 80 members as a cabinet with your ministers and deputy ministers to accommodate all the NEC members. Tomorrow, if the NEC goes to 200, then you'll have a cabinet of 200. The idea is that you want to keep all the NEC members in these positions so that they could be doing ANC work. But the reality is that it's costing the taxpayers money.
Okay, what's the average that a cabinet minister earns? Or minister, for example?
Roughly around 2 million a year, I would think, because that includes all your perks. And
in this country where we reside, is that not a grotesque wastage?
It is.
And is it justifiable? 2 million a year.
The president has indicated that some of the ministries are not relevant.
A member of parliament gets 120,000 rands per month.
Yes.
As I understand. The leader of the opposition gets about 130,000 rands per month.
I don't think that's
I've seen these figures being discussed by the Daily Maverick and some of these particular media outlets. But the point is, it's exorbitantly high, and my point is reduction in, at the very basic fundamental level, reduction in cabinet, reduction in salaries. All of this certainly at some level
I think what we should be doing is talking about our failing SOEs. That's the biggest, cost,
which has been bailed out by government.
Constantly being bailed out. Look at SAA, look at your Eskom, look at your Transnet, and all the issues that's currently coming up now through the Zondo Commission. You'll find that the government is bailing
your former minister, Nene, compromised himself from what we can see.
Yes, you saw that. So what is happening now is that there's been a lot of poor management decisions, and as a result of that, the poor taxpayer is burdened. He's paying for that, and that needs to be, we need to rethink about it. But my concern is around the fuel. I believe that the government needs to remove fuel taxes and levies immediately, and they need to cut the cloth to suit their
to suit the actual coat.
Yes, suit the coat. So right now they're not doing that and taking loans from China and all of that.
How much are these loans? What are you looking at?
You're looking at billions.
And of course, the interest rates are extremely high.
And the details of the actual loan
being paid by taxpayers.
Yes, the details of the actual loan itself and the repayment has not been disclosed. We don't know as South Africans what the implications of that would be. There's been talks that other countries who have been indebted to countries like China, where loans have been taken, they basically lost their independence. So you go and
it's very much like the kind of structural adjustment programs that you had in the 80s and the 90s, where these Western, imperial companies or former colonial powers come, basically give you massive loans via the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and then of course you need to structure your economy to accommodate them, not the other way around. And the same thing's happening with China now.
The money is not coming for
which
nothing.
is not being seen by government. I mean, how naive are they?
Yes.
How naive are they to fall for this particular trap?
I agree with you fully. I just feel that we need to introduce the wealth tax and the windfall tax. This windfall tax...
That can only happen if the conflict of interest breaks.
Correct.
Which means a lot of these government officials need to be removed from the positions of power.
Immediately. When Trevor Manuel was the Minister of Finance, he commissioned a task team to look at the possibility of introducing a windfall tax on Sasol. When the recommendations came to the cabinet then, Cabinet turned it down.
What was the reason for that?
Well, they gave no to me, and when I read the reasons, it didn't make sense at all. So you can see that the people that we've elected into government are protecting the interests of monopoly industries rather than protect the interests of the people. And this is something that we need to say no to. The question is, how do we do that? I believe that the timing now is perfect. If you go around the world, you'll find that whenever there's an election, It creates an ideal opportunity for the people to start voicing their concerns and to start letting these political parties, the government especially, to know how they feel on critical issues. At the moment, the reason the government is adopted this attitude around fuel, where it's a don't care a damn attitude. You know, it's like Marie Antoinette, who said, go let them eat cake when people wanted to have food during the French Revolution. It's the same thing that this government is doing right now. It's because the people are not standing up. The people are not saying enough is enough.
So you need a kind of civil disobedience. And I mean, I saw the example a few months ago in Germany where you had, I don't know how true these reports were, but apparently there was a mass kind of situation whereby the general population simply parked their cars.
No, that's
not actually what really happened.
No, that's not what happened. But it was something similar to that. In London, the truckers did that. But I'm saying no form of civil disobedience. We shouldn't be looking at doing illegal things.
Not illegal things,
yes,
but certainly something which would
showing
be
showing the government that we are united and we want this issue to be prioritized. We want the government to implement our proposals that we put on the table, and the only way to do that is to come out and support protests. Peaceful protests. You must
say
understand.
protests. Are you talking about marches, street marches?
I'm talking about marches. I'm talking about stayaways. I'm talking a simple thing.
Well, that is civil disobedience.
Well, yes, okay, that you could say that, but I'm not talking about where property is damaged.
No, of course not. That's unacceptable.
That's unacceptable, and people are injured and so on. But let's look at what the government teaches people in this country. The students, for years, the ANC said there'll be free education. The ANC government neglected that component of their promise. They did nothing about it. So the students started revolting. They made requests to the government, and then over a period of 2 to 3 years, they started protesting. The protest had to turn ugly. They burnt libraries, they damaged property, they did all of that until the government had to hear them and then introduce free tertiary education. Okay, not altogether, not entirely, but they
somewhat.
did somewhat. So the government teaches people, like look at currently, protests in Cape Town, protests in Johannesburg, Minister Bheki Cele.
Burning of schools, for example.
Yes, Minister Bheki Cele is leaving all his work and he's rushing off and going there. So if you want to get the ministers, you want to get the president, what do you do?
The message that is being said is that you resort to violence,
yes,
government will hear you. And that sets a dangerous precedent.
Absolutely dangerous precedent.
So that's where I want to say, where does PAPI come in? You've approached government.
Yes.
What's your next step?
Our position right now is we want to mobilize South Africans. We believe it's in the interest of every South African, and we started with a simple thing. We said, wear black. Everybody wears black.
And now what's your support
day.
base? What's your support? Because
okay,
I'll be honest with you, and maybe it's probably due to my ignorance or my lack of involvement on social media, but up until recently, I had never heard of PAPI. So how long have you been formed? How
yes,
strong is your support base?
Yeah.
And how meaningful can your impact be in the near future, or at least in the immediate future?
Yes. We were formed on the 6th of June this year. We have a very large following on social media. It's over 300,000 people who are supporting the cause.
Are there 300,000 likes or 300,000
well,
support?
Your likes and messages of support, and we've got WhatsApp groups. We've got close to 300 WhatsApp groups of 280 members per WhatsApp group. But that is not enough to get the message out. If we had the money, we had the resources, yes, we'd be able to get our message out.
So how are you funded at this point in time?
It's pure, our work is done purely voluntarily. Everything we do is done by volunteers. And obviously...
And it doesn't work sometimes.
It's not going to work. We're taking on the giants like the government, and we like a David and Goliath situation here right now. But I believe that we've been consistent. Ever since we started, we've been consistent. Our protests and our marches have not had the kind of numbers that we wanted to see, but because our cause was a just cause, the message is going out. And soon, as people are talking right now, we are the only group that's been actively campaigning for the reduction of fuel prices in this country.
Are there any other political parties that you're networking, either from the opposition?
Yes.
Are you an ANC member? I mean, you've come out quite strongly today on the ANC government. You are an ANC member. Less people don't know. But are there any other organizations, groups that you're networking with?
Yes, we've had the BLF, which has been on board with us.
That's Black First, Land First.
Yes, Black First, Land First. The DA also has been supporting us. But for me, I would like the ANC, and I'd like ANC members in particular, to start, questioning themselves and to ask
a kind of a self-introspection that's needed.
Yes, the ANC in
because
particular.
at governmental level, that's certainly not happening.
Yes.
Or rather, if they engage in it, the rot will basically be exposed.
Remember, all these ANC members of parliament and ministers and all of that are put there by the ANC members. And ANC members need to, within their own structures, start questioning their government representatives.
Question of accountability.
Accountability. They need to be accountable to the ANC and the ANC members, especially around resolutions that were taken around the wealth tax, for example. What are they doing about that? And the fact that the ANC prides itself in saying that they are the fighters of justice and fighters for the poor, the disenfranchised. I think they've forgotten that now.
So this is one last message. We've got about 40 seconds for you to communicate to the viewers out there. What would it be?
It would be to tell you that we can change the government, we can change the decision to bring fuel prices, we can make fuel prices reduced in this country if we stand together. Every one of us needs to unite. We need to send a message to the government that we are not accepting these fuel price increases. We have solutions on the table. The government needs to look at these solutions and implement them. The only way that we can achieve that is by uniting. Whether you belong to a school group, a church group, a mosque, temple, any organization, make sure that the issue of fuel prices is discussed in that committee. And let's start mobilizing, and let's start joining the protests. Let's start getting out on the street and making our voices heard.
Mr. Viswan Reddy, it's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, sir.
Well, there you have it, folks. We've had a robust engagement today. We've been discussing the fuel price increases. I want to leave you with a quotation by Nelson Mandela. He once stated that if the ANC does not deliver the goods, the people must do to it what they did to the apartheid regime. Has that time come now? Join us next week for more interactive debate and discussion on I Beg to Differ. This is Yusuf Ismail from ITV. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.